Here I have my Jupyter lab open, and as you can see, I have a bouncy data frame here. So today, we'll actually break down and take a look at how we can actually code this and make our data frames bouncy. So first things first, let's define a data frame. So import pandas as PD, and I'm just going to create a data frame containing a bunch of fruits. And let's print our df, and this is what we have. So one thing to note here is that if I choose to print df using the print function, it will look like this. However, if I choose to just type df here, we get a table. And this is because if we put some variable at the end of a Jupyter cell, it will automatically be displayed using the display function, which is this display. So our data frame here looks like a fancy table because of this display function. So before we move on, let's talk about the HTML class. So from ipython.core.display import HTML. So this HTML class will take in a HTML string and convert it into actual HTML for us to display in our Jupyter. For example, HTML, and I'm going to add a bunch of h1 tags. Hello, h1, and let's add a smaller h3 tag, world. And if we display this, whatever we type here will be displayed as HTML. And so there are actually multiple steps to displaying our table over here. So the very first step is that our data frame is converted into HTML using the toHTML method. So if I run this, we'll get a bunch of HTML code that represents the table that we print. So next, we convert this HTML string into actual HTML using the HTML class, and we get this table. And lastly, we explicitly call the display method, and we'll get our HTML table. So our main takeaway here is that we can edit the HTML that goes inside this HTML class, and we can make it look different. So let's start off with something simpler, and let's try to make our data frame red in color. So I'm going to define a function, red, and it takes in our data frame. So let's write our basic building blocks first. So HTML is equals to dataframe.toHTML. And next, we need to convert this into actual HTML using the HTML class. And afterwards, we need to display this. So for now, it will simply print our database. So next, we can start to edit this HTML string. So first, I'm going to add some CSS styles. So HTML plus equals to triple quoted strings. And I can add my style tag here. So one thing to note is that our data frame will have a data frame CSS class. And let's say we want to make the table data red. So TD, and here we do color is red. And if I run this, notice that now our table values have become red. And this is due to this CSS code over here. Next, let's try to make our data frame appear upside down. So similarly, I'm going to define a function upside down, and it's going to take in a data frame called df. So similarly, HTML is equals to df.toHTML, and afterwards we display the HTML class and the HTML string. And similarly, in the middle, we add our CSS styles. Upside down df. So next, let's add the code that will make our data frame appear upside down. So since our data frame has a data frame class, we do this dot data frame, and next we apply a transform. So transform, rotate 180 degrees, and if we run this, we'll get an upside down data frame. So notice that in our data frame table, the values are still red, and this is because of our red function. So let's actually remove this for now, and let's remove this too. So finally, let's figure out how to make our data frame bouncy. So similarly, we start with this bunch of code, and next, let's add the CSS stuff to make it bouncy. So first things first, we add our data frame class. Here we add a margin at the top, and let's just say 60 pixels. And we add a animation. So animation will be bounce, 1 second, and infinite. So our animation is called bounce. It lasts for 1 second, and because it is infinite, it will just repeat itself over and over again. So as of now, we haven't defined our bounce animation yet, so let's do that now. Add keyframes and bounce. So this bounce will be called over here. And so let's define 0%, 20%, 40%, 60%, and 100%. And we translate y as 0, which means that at 0% of the animation, 20% of the animation, 40% of the animation, 60% of the animation, and 100% of the animation, our data frame will be at rest. So now in between 0 and 20%, we have 10%. So here we transform and translate y -60 pixels so that it goes upwards. So let's see what this looks like now. Bounce df. So notice that it makes one bounce. So here at 0% it does nothing, and at 10% it goes up by 60 pixels. And for the rest of the animation it does nothing yet. So next, let's add our 30% and translate y, and now let's make it go up by 40 pixels. So this will be a smaller bounce than our first bounce, and let's run this. So notice now that we have one larger bounce and one smaller bounce. So the larger bounce is due to this line, and the smaller bounce is due to this line. And next, let's add something between 40% and 60%. So 50%, transform and translate y, -20 pixels. So let's make this bounce even smaller. So now we should expect there to be 3 bounces. The first bounce being the highest, the second bounce being the second highest, and the third bounce being the lowest. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So as you can see, we have successfully created a bouncy data frame. Anyway, the main takeaway today would be that we can insert CSS code into our Jupyter. Thanks for watching, and I hope we have learned at least one new thing about Python today.